Hello, my name is Simon Amster. I'm the creative partner at JSL Content, who make content, hence why I'm doing this. I've done lots of jobs. I've been creative director at Disney, global creative director at NBC Universal, worked at lots of ad agencies and PR agencies across London and New York, and now I spend my life making content. But I, like a lot of people, don't really understand exactly what it is. So I thought I would ask some people who are much smarter than me exactly what the answer might be, and hopefully we can come to something at the end of this next 45 minutes. Words are weird. They mean lots of different things. I got here today by cycling, although technically I also have a little electric motor attached to my bicycle. So it's not really cycling, it's kind of electric cycling or e-biking. Also, that motor potentially is slightly more powerful than is legally allowed. So it's not really even e-biking, but it's kind of motorized scootering. And then anyone who actually cycles says it's not cycling at all anyway, and I'm just fat and lazy. So what I'm trying to say here is that cycling kind of means different things to different people at any different time. Content's a little bit like that. It can be a post on Instagram. It can be a 3-second GIF. It can be a 90-minute film paid for by a Spanish beer brand starring an actor from Game of Thrones. It can be a full TV show about rugby. It can be a behind-the-scenes show about another TV show. Essentially, there are no rules at the moment, and I thought it might be interesting to discuss whether there should be any and whether it really matters whether any exist or not. So I've put together 5 people here who are very smart and all work in content. Just so you know, I've worked with 4 of them in my past lives, and the one that I haven't worked with currently works with my wife. So I will be very nice to her, and the others will just have to deal with me being what I was like when I worked with them. At the far end, we have Gavin Johnson. Gavin is the MD of Joe Media, who, if you don't know them, are one of the top portholes for content for young gentlemen in the UK. And Gavin has always been, previous to that, he was the director of sales at AOL. And then we have Martin Delamere, who is the deputy director of content and kind of lead strategist at Ogilvy. And he works with hundreds of brands. And in his past life, he was, amongst many other things, the executive creative director at Sky and set up the Sky Creative Agency. And we have Sarah Monteith. Sarah Monteith's, I have to go back to my notes for actually Sarah's job title because it's way too complicated. She's the Global Director, Brand and Content Marketing across the output of BBC Studios. Is that close enough?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
And she's also had her own, created her own digital brand agency and was once the director of BBC Children in Need. Then we have Darren Sequeira. Is that the best way to say it? Darren is the entertainment lead at Facebook, which Mark Zuckerberg has said that we're not allowed to actually explain what that means. So it's very pro, but it doesn't mean he goes to more openings and premieres than anyone I've ever seen via your Facebook feed.
I work quite hard selling ads as well, Simon, but yeah.
And lastly, but not least, we have Angela Everett. So Angela also has an exceptionally good job title. And she is the SVP of Creative Strategy and Agency Solutions at The Economist. It's a new job title.
It's brand new, yeah.
And at The Economist, and she looks after all of their kind of brand content work and strategy work, and has also, amongst other things, been the editor of the RAC magazine and Tesco's food magazine. Everyone has interesting lives. So, first question, Martin. What the fuck is content?
Well, I mean, it can
Hopefully
be
this will get me out of this.
I mean, it really can be anything. I think that's sort of a problem and an opportunity for everyone because it can be absolutely anything. It's very hard to tell the difference between real news, fake news. Has this come from a traditional publisher? Have they got no skin in the game, or is it from a brand? So there's kind of a massive opportunity for people to be transparent and to be authorities in this world now, because everything you read, you're like, I don't know about this. It's a real challenge now. And it was a massive challenge in the elections. I think it's going to be an ongoing challenge in our culture. Yeah.
I mean, I think there are a number of different brands here that are very open about what they do in terms of advertorial, editorial, and some brands that basically blur the lines. Gavin, how does Joe's deal with that?
Yeah, so we're a publisher, as you said, Simon. We are got 30 million followers, predominantly male audience. We cover sport, politics, entertainment, and so forth. We look at it in terms of just trying to make as entertaining content as possible. So, a good example, recently we launched a show called House of Rugby, which 6 weeks in, it's hosted by Alex Payne, used to be on Sky Sports. James Haskell is the sort of recurring guy on the show every single week. This week we had Billy Vanapola on it as well. So, and in kind of space of 6 weeks, it's gone pretty stratospheric. It's kind of the second most popular sports podcast in the UK. We distribute it on YouTube. It goes on there, it goes on Facebook, it goes on Twitter, it goes on Instagram and so forth. But ultimately what we're trying to create is really engaging content. Guinness are the partner on it, which makes it quite interesting. So Guinness are integrated into the show. Alex references Guinness at the start. There's a little sting at the start, there's a sting at the end. But what we also successfully do to get, obviously we're a commercially driven business, Guinness have a segment in it called The Perfect Pour. For those of you who don't know, it takes 119.5 seconds to pour the perfect pint of Guinness. So each week we do something which takes 119.5 seconds. Last week, James Haskell had to remember the team that he was part of, which was the last team to beat the All Blacks at Twickenham in 2012. And it's very entertaining. The clock's ticking down. And at the end of it, he jokes about Guinness. So Guinness are very happy because they're getting the reference. They're getting that young male audience that they're looking to obviously convert into Guinness drinkers. But what we've got is really, really entertaining content, which our followers like, our users like, and anyone who comes to Joe.
I feel like I need to fly the flag, though, for editorial independence, and you knew I'd say that. But at The Economist, and I think it's interesting because you're not positioning yourself as an objective purveyor of news, and so to blur the lines in that way between brand and storytelling is absolutely fine. But for us and the publisher model that we adhere to is, our editorial staff have absolutely nothing to do with our brand storytelling. And there are plenty of newspapers, publishers out there who do blur those lines. Hello, New York Times, I'm looking at you. The FT will do anything for money. But if we were to prostitute our editorial staff in that way, then how on earth...
Big word.
I know, I'm coming out with the big ones. How on earth could we then, let's say we take Google's marketing dollar, which we do as a brand agency, if our editorial staff were involved in that, how can we then possibly hold them account the next week with any credibility when we want to challenge them on antitrust, when we want to challenge them on anti-competitive behaviour? We just couldn't do that. And some newspapers do try, but that's the line in the sand that we draw, and it's a tough one commercially to tread, but that's where we hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah, and I think, as you'd expect me to say, that's very similar at the BBC, where editorial vision and strategy and purpose is very separate to anything else and is never influenced by commercial need at all, which is what you'd expect me to say. I do think, though, it's kind of perhaps easier for us in that content, if you like, is our core product. So, we can be very kind of highfalutin about this whole thing, but actually if content is your core product, you can, even by rules of not influencing the editorial, you can then obviously have a lot of content that is derivative of the core content and say, well, we're just creating dialogue with that content. We're just building audience with that content, which is right, and rightly so. But I think it is a bit harder if you're a product where your core is not content, like Guinness. And I think probably you find, that people are probably more sniffy about that. And should they be?
Darren, how do you find, as Facebook, you kind of straddle a line between this? How do you see it?
Yeah, so and Facebook now is not just Facebook, but Facebook apps and services, so Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp. So you see the relationship between audiences and content being different, not surprisingly, in each of the platforms. So, for example, with Facebook, the use case is more, and because that's friends and family focused in the behavior and the usage of the platform, that audiences see content as just good content. Good, compelling, interesting, exciting, sad, emotional type content from friends and family, as well as hopefully interesting and compelling content from brands that they're interested in. Whereas if you go to a platform like Instagram, it's quite different. If you use Instagram, you probably follow more influences around passion points, things that are specifically interesting to you. And we're constantly analysing the way our audiences are perceiving content, because that's how we enhance the platform. And on Instagram, for example, there's a delineation between feed and stories. So in feed, that's seen more as the, if you like, the more official side of Instagram, both from influencers putting official type content and friends and family also posting. Whereas on stories, this is seen as much more personable, casual, humorous. Recent survey, 39% of people said they are drawn closer to their friends and family and also to brands that they like when they're heavy users of stories. So that sort of more casual approach with the emojis and the different overlays that you can do sparks something quite emotional in people's usage that has a real takes a real effect of the way they're perceiving that content.
I think I really agree with that. And one of the things when I looked at this and Simon said to me, "What the fuck is content?" and I don't know, was that
you're meant to know.
Sorry,
That's
I do
the
know.
point of
Well,
this.
I kind of know, but I think that it depends on you as a business. I think as a business, you need to decide what content is to you and what is authentic for you. So certainly for the BBC, I would say that our content is about story. There is very little from us that you will see that isn't about a story. I mean, even I'm not, news is our UK only and I'm global, so, but even there, that journalism is about the story. And so for us, it's, we would expect content from us to have a story, that it would be engaging, that it would also produce dialogue. Because actually what we're doing most of the time with our content is, the old TV model is that, you've got a lovely 13-ep series and then you go away again and then you come back next year and up pops Doctor Who or whatever. Well, we don't want to lose that audience. In the old days, it was fine because they'd be on BBC One or they'd be on BBC America and they'd just pop back in autumn because they've been sitting around and waiting for it. That doesn't happen anymore. We all know that. So we are constantly trying to keep that dialogue high, keep it evergreen across our big brands. And in doing that, we are looking at expanding the story and keeping the story evergreen. And quite often, actually, for us, it's the fans that direct what the content is. I'm sure for a lot of you guys too. And it's actually sometimes the fans that write the content for us. And so if it's not about story, I don't think we really do it. And I think that, but I think for other brands, it might not be about story at all. So I think there is something about defining content by what you can bring authentically and what people would expect from you. I'm not saying we shouldn't be surprising, we should all be surprising, but in a context of what do people expect from the BBC? And I think it is that story-based content.
I think one point that comes up there that is quite interesting is that 4 of the people on this panel, actually 5, including me, have spent a great deal of their life in broadcast, traditional TV broadcast. And I think that potentially those kind of stories, that kind of fan thing, at Disney we used to, when we launched things like High School Musical, it was always on a build, launch, sustain model. So actually, even when the show wasn't on, you were constantly making sure that your audience and your fans were talking about it. We didn't know this was called content. It was just stuff that we did. So I think anyone that's worked in TV is kind of quite uniquely set up, or journalism, actually, because you're having that constant kind of connection with your audience to actually work in this model. Do you think that does make sense in the way that people are now using content?
I mean, I think, I'm from a broadcast background, as you say, and I think it's the quality principles are exactly the same. House of Rugby's, for example, that's a show which it's got 8 people producing that when we produce it on Tuesday evening at 5, 6 o'clock, and then but then the hard things these days, yes, you've got to edit that show. Within an hour of the show, you can listen to it as a podcast. By 11 a.m. the next day, we've got the long form, YouTube version out. I think there's probably about 11 or 12 different iterations in terms of how you can consume that kind of content. So it's still the same principles that I grew up with like 15 years ago of, okay, this is how you produce a great show. Just the world's changed and nuanced slightly in terms of how I might listen to it this morning. I might watch a clip. I might see an Instagram post. I might see the 5-minute version on Facebook. I might see the 59-minute version on YouTube. So it's kind of changed, but the principles are the same. And I think we're in a hell of a place now, a really good place, certainly from a UK perspective, where actually quality standards are going back up again. The kind of cats on skateboard stuff, which viral videos 4 or 5 years ago,
awesome.
I think is thankfully leaving us, and I think where success is going to come from actually going back to high quality, that's where BBC will always be great. And don't forget, I just reminded of a stat yesterday, which is a ThinkBox stat, which is 80% of video viewing is TV. 67% of that is live TV, 13% of it is catch-up TV, and then 20% is the rest. And we obviously fall into the remaining 20%, but I think the remaining 20% is getting higher and higher quality. And obviously, I'd say we're a good example of that. We're producing amazing content in our purpose-built studio with top talent, but then cutting it up and distributing in different ways.
Hence, brands like Facebook now becoming a broadcaster. And that's clearly, if you'd have said that a few years ago, people go, why would they be interested in that? It's like Amazon opening real shops. It's almost looking at kind of previous models and working out how you can redo them.
Yeah, for sure. So we spend a lot of time on the right content in the right environment, working with brands, working with content creators, to optimize essentially how that content appears at the different places across our network. So over the last 5 years, we spent a lot of time with traditional content makers, if you like, essentially trying to shorten content, because the primary use case up until now, and to what Simon's referring to, our sort of new foray into Facebook Watch and IGTV into sort of mid-form and long-form content. Up until that point, the primary use case of Facebook, Instagram, and our platforms, Messenger, etc., was short form on the go. That's the nature of the mobile device. So we spent a lot of effort. I work in the entertainment category. I naively assumed that Hollywood would be ahead of the curve in this stuff, and actually there was arguably one of the most traditional businesses, and I spent time in FMCG as well, to try and unravel where their position was, which is to be wedded to the 2-minute trailer. And we spent a hell of a lot of time. So the 2-second audition, which is sort of one way that we encapsulate how quickly you need to get your message across to capture attention in feed and on stories, was not something that went down well, with directors, with creators, with movie makers at all. And when we started on that journey about 5 years ago, less than 5% of content from movie makers we would say was mobile optimized. So short form, creative captions, square format. Now well over 50% is. So you can see we've still got a hell of a journey to go, but we've made quite some strides.
Just ask, outside of format and directing content creators on length and, like you say, being device appropriate, how much does algorithm or metric then influence what you tell them to create from a creative point of view, from a storytelling point of view? Does that have any influence on that as well?
It does. I mean, that starts to enter the sort of the dark arts, not of the algorithm, but the dark arts of content and creation. Because now then you're talking about how people are emotionally responding to a thing, and can we calculate for that? So, that's not really territory that we're in quite yet. However, what we do, for example, so for any of you that use the platforms, like commenting and sharing, has been a sort of a measure, if you like, for the sort of Facebook's version of engagement with content. And we've had we're constantly asked, well, how does the algorithm, how does the black box work so we can optimize our content? There is about 1,500 decisions per second per user being made to decide what content appears in your feed. So that's a very complex question. However, what we do with organic content that is put on the platform is that we prioritize content that's getting more likes, comments, and shares.
I find that terrifying, and I find that from a creative point of view really depressing, because it's the bubble. It's the kind of I've seen a lot of that, so therefore I need to see more of that. And I find, again, as like working for an organisation that tries to give an objective fully rounded point of view, and sometimes telling people things or talking to them about things that they're not going to like. You know, for example, in New York recently we had an event and we invited Steve Bannon, and we got all sorts of criticism for that. But you've got to speak to these people. You can't challenge, frankly, stupidity if you don't have it in the room. So I don't know, like, where's the line there? Where do you draw the line between, like, yeah, we know people like this, so we'll do more of it, when actually maybe what you should be doing, and as people who all have a commercial remit as well, that thing that surprises, that kind of makes you sit up and go, like, what the fuck, is the thing that will drive, like, perversely will drive more engagement.
Yeah.
I think it's really, I think it's really important to sort of distinguish between news and other types of content here.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, and you'd expect me to say this and you would say the same, from a news perspective, I think the thing that the BBC absolutely stands by is its impartiality. I would stand up and believe in that, for the rest of my life. I think we're truly blessed, but you'd expect me to say that. I think that's very different from entertaining people. There's a big difference in that. And actually, Facebook's algorithms actually are no different from what we do. I mean, we use all that stuff too, but it's no different from what we've done for years. I mean, we put content out there and we work out whether the audience like it or not. Do they like that brand? Do they like that actor? Do they like, that storyline? What do they like? What do they don't? And guess what? We give them more of what they like. I mean, yes, you've got to take that, you've also got to add the creative intel onto that to understand that what people are liking at the moment, they're going to go off if you keep recreating it. And also that people do like to be surprised, so you've got to take some chances. But broadly, we've always measured our content within an inch of its life and looked at what we would do and what we would commission and what does it look like. And I don't, I think that's the same. In entertainment, I think news is very, very different.
I think the point here, though, is the job of a creative when you're making content to challenge, or is it to just give people more of what they want? I think we've all seen the kind of Spotify algorithms that said, you listen to this, therefore you're like this. And what they've clearly forgotten is that my 6-year-old son has had access to my Spotify, and I don't want to listen to whatever shit he's been listening to.
You don't like Baby Shark?
No, the problem is he's listening to terrible, terrible, terrible tunes. But I think we've always been brought up that the challenge is the exciting part of our job. And as creators, as people, I think when you're strategizing work, when you're thinking about, and Martin, you must have this a lot, when you're going back to brands, when they've given you a brief and you're telling them that actually they shouldn't be doing the thing that the computer is telling them to do. That must be really tough.
There are a lot of questions, you'll have this as well on The Economist, a lot of times where you're saying, this white paper makes a lot of sense, and I know your analyst spent a long time writing it, but you want people to read this, it's going to have to be accessible. They may never read the 5,000 word version. Though at the same time, I think there's a return again to deeper content. There are massive challenges. I think rather similar to you guys, I think there is a massive opportunity for brands to become authorities because there's such uncertainty. There's no reason why a brand, even though they've got skin in the game, can't be an authority on, I don't know, home renovation or energy, or they have to be a bit transparent about it.
And authentic. It has to be that, people, it's believable.
Yeah. I mean,
Martin and I, for transparency, worked with B&Q for a couple of years, and making content. We built their You Can Do It channel, and it wasn't just done to sell products. It was actually really important that it was done to encourage people to do DIY. Then if they made the choice to buy the products from B&Q, that was their choice. But actually, it was about growing the segment, not about selling a drill. And that was really important in the content production in order to make sure that people still cared about DIY.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, you have this, the things that brands always get wrong is they kind of like, when they come to you, we want to do content. Because there's, to some extent, it's permission marketing. People have to volunteer, vote with their feet to watch it. I mean, forget the first 5 seconds in social. They have to kind of spend a bit of time with it because we need to get them off the first thing, the trailer, and get them into the world of the brand or on to watch the whole of Doctor Who or watch the whole show. So there has to be a kind of a pretty clear intent, and there has to be kind of almost good intentions in it, I think. And I think people will start responding to that when they can see the clear vision, there's a purpose, and people are being authentic about whatever they're selling or describing. I'm
not sure if it's going to work, but I've got a couple of examples of how we blur the lines between editorial and commercial. Is it going to work? So this is a couple of examples here where on the left-hand side you can see this is one of our animators has created a video. Sarri came in as the Chelsea boss, and he smokes 12 cigarettes a day. It's really entertaining. It did like hundreds of thousands worth of views. On the right-hand side, we've got the same animator doing a commercial campaign for Coca-Cola. So apart from the video in the middle, as you're seeing there, the rest of it's all animated in the same way. Both are really, really entertaining. The left-hand side, we've entertained and people are sort of understanding about Sarri. The right-hand side, you've got really, stuff which is kind of CSR stuff for Coke, but it does exactly the same job. This is example on the left-hand side. We did a series with a comedian called Tez about the Ramadan diaries, demystifying, what Muslims go through when they go through Ramadan. On the right-hand side, this is a paid-for bit of content we did with the government for Time to Change about mental health with Russell Kane. Both look the same. The commercials never do quite as well as the editorial, but they still deliver on the KPIs. So again, blurring the lines between the two. Ultimately, it's both content, both entertaining, work really, really well. And then another quick example here, left-hand side is Gillette, precision play all around the World Cup, pay for content, £250,000 deal. Right-hand side, really interesting footage of the World Freestyle Championships, which we kind of hosted and recorded and everything like that. And then the final one is this one, which is House of Rugby, which you touched on before, which, I can see you've got Haskell on there with Alex Payne and Nick Kennedy, but this is what it looks like this is Billy Vinapola telling a very funny story about the first time he went to Cardiff with the England team, going through the centre of Cardiff, got all of the Welsh fans going around, and you got an old granny pushing a little kind of basket with her shopping in. She looks up at Billy Vinapola and gives him the finger like this, and it's a very funny story, but this is obviously sat there on Twitter. It takes people straight into, okay, I want to watch this longer form content. We take people to longer form content. So it's just quite interesting how we try and blur the lines between commercial considerations, but also editorial as well. And we're sort of hitting the mark at the minute.
I think there's lots there that's really interesting. One of the things that and Sarah, you raised the word authenticity, or authentic, which is one of the words that is a complete kind of, it's in every brief we get, and everyone wants to be authentic. One thing I think is really interesting about a number of the people that are sitting here, and certainly with Joe, with the BBC, and with The Economist, I would argue that the people working there are actually the thing that makes them incredibly authentic. The people that are working there are your audience. Certainly the people that are working at the BBC are very much people who watch the BBC. And my God, the people that work at The Economist are the people who read The Economist and they watch The Economist content. And I think that's often really, really important in order to provide the right kind of things. It doesn't mean you can't do it. I used to work on teen channels and living TV, for God's sake. And apparently I'm not a teen or a woman. But it does help, and it does allow you to produce work that can genuinely be seen as authentic and true to the brand that you're working with.
It does, but I think you have to be really careful because, if brands just employ people like us and, give ourselves a pat on the back, and didn't we all love Strictly last week? I mean, I'll be honest, I think Strictly is an awesome programme. It's not really my thing. Please don't tweet that. It's there's a whole portfolio of content. So at the BBC, there's some stuff that I absolutely love, and there's some stuff that I'm just not as interested in. I still think it's quality and it works for the audience, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think you have to have a diverse setup, or your brand slowly just congratulates itself into a slow kind of death, if you like. So, I mean, we are constantly trying to make the BBC as diverse a place as possible. And we also, want to as we should, speak on behalf of British creativity generally. So the other thing that we're constantly trying to do is, work with lots of partners and other creators in order to champion them or help them get the platform. And, firstly, that's the right thing to do for a public service organisation at its heart. But secondly, it's a savvy thing to do, because that's how you start bringing diversity and make sure you're approaching all audiences. And I would say, that actually the audience is key. I know it's obvious, but we do often, all of us in our lives, kind of forget that. So, a piece of content is only good or relevant or high quality or whatever if that audience that you're making it for actually feels it is. And that's all that really matters. So, we do a lot of stuff that's very, very different. It's all different from each other, but it is directed at certain audiences. It doesn't have to please everybody. And I think, that's quite important too. And sometimes you can forget about the audience whilst you're thinking about the platform. Like, oh, is this right? Should it be 2 seconds or 4 seconds, or should it be half an hour, or should it be? It's kind of the wrong question. The question is, well, who are we doing it for, and what do they want to see? And then, what is the platform? What should it be? How long should it be? That's quite different for telly. Telly's not used to thinking that way, and we think about it like that now. But we've had to be much more diverse and challenge ourselves to think differently.
And we spend a huge amount of time before we do anything investigating audiences. I mean, it's astonishing sometimes the lens they'll go to. People do ethnography. Hellman's, to get to their kind of, great big world of recipes and...
Essentially, people like mayonnaise.
Yeah. Well, you can see what the problem is. Like, they want to sell mayonnaise. They know they have to now do it through content and engagement. What are we going to talk about all the time? So you have to talk about something adjacent, like the quality and taste of food. So, they did loads of investigations. They came out, Grilltopia was this thing. So there's a great big encyclopedia of how to grill. They do, but, you have to imagine audiences you know nothing about. Like, how do you create content for somebody who's deciding which jet engine to put on the next fleet in 20 years' time? That's a real long tail sell. That's a very, very, they even know very, very narrow range of information. You have to kind of get to know them really well. And there are now millions of ways to do it. And like you say, I think broadcasters are learning. That's where broadcasters are getting more like ad agencies, in that they're learning the audiences a bit more, and it becomes a bit more personalised.
I think as well, it's something that, because I work very much in the B2B marketing space, and that's something that we still have yet to learn from sort of B2C marketers, broadcasters. It is that focus on audience first. I mean, we field our own market research once a year to make sure that we're kind of doing the right things. And we fielded a study, 1,600 senior people worldwide, and it was find out where marketers' heads were at, like broadly. And I was staggered by this. Only 20% of global marketers view making their audience more knowledgeable as a key objective. Like, this is in the B2B space. And that blew my socks off. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you don't... And their key objective was press mentions or kind of standing out from the competition. And like, wow, which was an enormous opportunity for us and the work we do. But, how self-serving, it is that I'm going to look good in my next meeting if I do this thing. It's amazing.
Which I think leads on to another question, which is, can content be accurately measured? It's always been one of those things that people talk about. It's about brand engagement, whereas traditional advertising has been more about ROI. But surely that's got to change, because, we're living in a world where a lot of brands now don't do any traditional advertising. So actually, there has to be a smart measuring. Any thoughts on how we do measure it?
I think one great example, Alan Sugar tweeted, I don't know if everyone saw it, but Alan Sugar tweeted about the John Lewis ad last week. New John Lewis ad gets out. Obviously, I thought it was brilliant. I don't know what everyone else thought. I thought it was really entertaining. No, something like it. But Alan Sugar basically cynically, a bit like it on The Apprentice, he cynically went, actually, total drivel, total waste of cash. There's a whole loads of study over the last few years where for every £1 that John Lewis have spent on these ads, they've got £8 back. Every £1 they've been spending, and they've spent a lot of cash on these, and it will take them a year to do that, they're getting £8 back. So And that would class that John Lewis had as content. I watched it on YouTube, right? Because I was like, oh, it's come out. I clicked through from Twitter, went through into it and watched it on Twitter or YouTube or whatever. So actually, there is great measurement that if you have amazing content, like we did a show last year called Total Techers, where we measured it as well with Nielsen, and the results were absolutely phenomenal. So, but that was a content series. That was, Xbox with our partner on it, and Xbox were featured in the show, but ultimately it was a really entertaining show. But we worked with Nielsen, and we got some amazing results on the back of it.
I think we have extreme caution over longer form content for all brands. I think John Lewis sort of stands out as a slightly unique example. If you go think about Hellmann's, which is sort of the predominant types of brands that we're working with, we've found no correlation with time spent with content of those types of brands and sales. Now that's definitely geared towards our platforms because our platforms are shorter form.
How convenient.
However, not just but advertising in general, is about frequency, memory structures that are built up over quick, short, sharp experiences with the brand. Primarily, if we were to measure sort of all commercial endeavor across all the different brands, with some outliers like John Lewis, etc. So we spent a lot of time going, okay, well, if that's sort of predominantly the journey that consumers go through to buy a product, and making beautiful content about Hellmann's is a great sort of creative endeavor, but in the end, Hellmann's are going to ask about the bottom line, then we've focused our efforts on how you can actually take that amazing piece of content that Hellmann's may produce, but sort of atomize it into moments that can have that frequency, memory, structure effect on our platforms.
I think it's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because I think if you work in a broadcaster, actually you work in hour-long segments or series-long segments, and actually I think my gut feeling is very much, well, actually it is that long-term engagement which ultimately leads to a more positive relationship. It's a little bit like the difference between getting married and having a one-night stand. They both serve a purpose. I can't remember what either of those purposes are.
I think it's exactly like that.
I don't know where I'm going with this one. But it is different. But I think that there is an understanding that what content can do is actually straddle both of these areas. I'm always fascinated by things that clearly have almost no ROI attached to them, but are content-based. So a great example is something like Volvo Epic Splits, because I don't know anyone who spent £350,000 on a truck as a consequence to it. I recently worked on a campaign with Otis Lifts, making 2-minute content for them, but nobody buys one. But they wanted specifically to have some new connections with their audience in a way that they could never do in a traditional way. So
isn't that just about the metrics that you use? I think again we have to rethink how we measure stuff and what measurement is meaningful. I don't know that example, but I would say that they probably weren't expecting that to have a direct result in someone buying a truck, and I would imagine, and that actually what they were hoping for was to build a dialogue with an audience. We do a lot that is not about directly buying something from us, but we have huge fan bases that we can mobilize when we want to. 100 million fans for Doctor Who globally. That's a huge amount of people that when you want to mobilize and you want to move them to another piece of content, or you want to drive them towards the next launch or the next Doctor or whatever that might be, you've got there, sitting there sort of in dialogue with you, that then brings that back into you. It's the same with sort of, planet Earth. Keeping that dialogue going means that the next time you land something, it really, really lands. So I think, we're all in businesses. We absolutely measure what our content does for us. It might not be a revenue measure, but it's certainly a measure, and I think you would do sort of exactly the same. And I would also say from the Hellmann's example, all that happened there was that you made that appropriate for the platform and the audience you're talking to. It wasn't any different. So, I think there's absolutely ways to measure it. I don't think we do anything we can't measure. Just might not be revenue first.
We wouldn't get paid if we can't measure things. they just stopped doing it. I mean, you've got to think as well that across the whole customer journey, it's not just social. I mean, an example that might illustrate this is like F1 currently we work with, and they're trying to convert a TV reach audience around the world of 500 million, but they have no direct or very little direct connection with their fans at the moment. Because they want to move them around, they want to move them onto different things, fantasy gaming, all this sort of thing. And they just want to understand their fans more. So they're going direct over the top of the broadcasters around the world. And that's a chance, because what you want to do is then own a relationship, direct relationship with customers, fans, you know. In fact, you never really want to treat them like customers, you treat them like fans. Which, I mean, I think you guys do, and I think obviously the BBC do. And so there is a really important thing where the engagement has to go beyond that moment, because you have to take them off and away from that moment into something more significant, something a bit longer term.
I mean, your point just now about measuring the right thing it's so right. I mean, again, and I can only really speak from a B2B perspective, but when someone says to me, oh yeah, I want to get like 10,000 views of this video, and I'm talking to a B2B client, like, well, you know, it hasn't got a cat in it, so I can't do that for you. So, because what you're talking about is very niche. You know, if I get maybe 100 of the right eyes on that, then that's your win, because those are 100 people who are really engaged, and they're going to take away and they're going to do something as a result of seeing that thing. I think people get so starry-eyed about big numbers, like big metrics, you know, and really it is, again, just to re-emphasize that point about measuring the right thing. And yeah, like absolutely, you can then, that's then your stick yard in the sand for like, that's my return on investment.
I think we're so used to big numbers being the be-all and end-all that actually appropriate numbers and appropriate audiences, which we all know in our heart of hearts are much more vital, become slightly less sexy. You know, like you said, 100 correct people are better than 10,000 incorrect people, but 100 isn't as sexy as 10,000. So I think it's something that we all, you know, need to reset our balances up for a little bit. We have only got 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask one last question, just go down the panel. What do you think the future holds for content and content marketing?
I think it's going to get, the quality is going to get better and better. The barriers to entry are lower in terms of cost. Because of, you know, distribution mechanisms such as Facebook or Insta or Twitter or Snap, businesses can, and if you've got quality content, you can scale it really, really quickly. I'll obviously use the example of our House of Rugby has gone from 0 to 60 in no time at all, but that's because we've got great talent in-house, 8 people producing that show, but we've got the mechanism to use Facebook or use Insta and so forth and scale it really. If you've got the right people in-house, and you can do it, but answer to your question, I think quality is going to now start to creep back up again. I think we had a big dip over probably 3 or 4 years ago, but now quality is going to be recognised, and whether that's through Instagram TV or Facebook Watch or YouTube, actually, and that's something from a social perspective, quality is going to go up.
I mean, I think that part of the quality might be about building trust and being coherent and consistent in what you're saying and authentic, and I think that would apply to everybody from an airline to the BBC.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a brand and you're not absolutely obsessed with content, then you better watch out in the next few years, because that is how audiences are consuming your brand or your product. And, you know, my only other sort of thing about it, apart from authenticity, is about that generosity as well. You know, you have to be giving something that's not just about selling your product or getting someone to watch your show. And the final point I'd make is about quality. I think we need to rethink what we mean by quality. So the BBC is all about quality, but quality is actually seeing something in a way that is most compelling for you as an audience. It's not just about massive, big production budgets and everything looking like it's a, you know, flipping Hollywood movie. That doesn't always work. So what do we mean by quality content is quite an interesting one. That could be your next session there. I've given that to you.
If I'm ever asked
You're
back
welcome.
again.
Yeah, so future of content. So to Sarah's point earlier, storytelling. That's not. I've got 3 to give, but storytelling I think will underpin, should continue to underpin everything, because I think that's just core to our human existence, and that's why we continue to go back to different forms of storytelling. So that will should continue to be the driver of content. But I'll offer up 3 things that, if you like, are bets for Facebook as a company. Don't know whether they'll happen or not. Some are already in progress. So the first one's content as utility. So I don't know if anyone's used sort of AR experiences, companies like L'Oreal, makeup, cosmetic companies, and retailers. So AR, so content as utility that could lead to sales and profitability. That's the first one. Second one, immersion. So we've talked about great storytelling and different types of immersion in different categories. We have Oculus. There's a 360 company here at this conference. So deeper immersion in either that format or something related to that is definitely a bet for us. And the third one, a bit more sort of back to sort of the present, is shared experiences with content. So again, a bit of a bet for us. You may have used Facebook Live or Instagram Live or Periscope or some of the live services, but also you'll see functionality like Watch Party and Watch With. So seeing a great piece of content and in the moment being able to gather a viewing audience of your friends and family through a touch of a button. We've added that functionality. We're going to test whether that actually is of interest to audiences, but those are sort of 3 key areas for the future that we're focusing on at Facebook.
I'll be quick. I think I agree with all of that, but a little niche future thing I'm seeing already, and I think will become bigger. And we haven't said the dreaded millennial word yet, and I'm going to drop another bomb, Gen Z. Those younger audiences, we are seeing, expect brands to have a point of view and much more beyond just simply, I want to sell you some stuff. It's like, what do you believe about X, social issues? And that is such a tricky line for brands to tread. And if you can do it in an authentic way, I think that's where you're going to win out in the future.
I think hitting authentic, Gen Z, and
I
millennial,
win.
you win the bingo game. Thank you very much. I don't think there's any time for questions. Apparently there is, if anyone has any questions. No one has any questions.
Stunned silence.
Hello.
I have a question for Martin from an advertising point of view. If content can be many things and many different things to different people, when does something stop being traditional advertising and start being content?
I don't think it really matters. I think what more matters is whether. One of the principles we always work on for the particular audience is this going to be useful or entertaining. I think that's a better way to think about it. Some of it will be traditional advertising, some of it will be content, some of it will be social, some of it might be a utility, it might be an app, it might be an experience, it might be a service, intervention, that sort of thing. So I don't think it really matters. It matters to some creatives sometimes, but I think there's a new generation of creatives who've come into advertising from broadcasts or magazines or what have you, who are different about it. Sometimes it might be. I thought that stuff that, the 14 to 18 stuff that the Imperial War Museum commissioned, I thought that was fantastic. And some of it was like conceptual art, some of it was poems. There was the reworking of the archive. But you can see what the brief was. It was like, make our archive come to life for people again. And it was, is it art? Is it advertising? I think, the mantra we always go is it useful or entertaining for this particular audience in what you want or they want to do.
Hi. In my opinion, I just think that content is where brand values meet your audience. So you build content.
Can't hear you too well.
Sorry. It's on, apparently. Oh, that's better. In my opinion, you should place content where brand values meet your audience, and then wrapped with your objectives, measurement, data, are very much aimed at the persona that you're trying to attract or build upon. And that brand could be, for example, with the BBC, I used to work for Universal Music, so the brand was whatever recording artists we were supporting at the time. So a brand doesn't have to be the whole company or the whole umbrella organisation. It's whatever brand you're identifying that you're dealing with, like at that time. With regards to measurement and return on investment, it's very hard to, unless you've got a really tight customer journey, it's really hard to actually measure when that person's going to re-engage with you through that piece of content. So I think that's something else to consider. You know, when you're saying about John Lewis, every pound they invest, £8 comes back. I'd be interested to see how they map that against the customer journey and how they're actually coming to that figure, because it's a very hard thing to do. At the moment, I work for Ann Summers, and I can tell you, we haven't got a customer journey because most people switch it off when they come to us. We don't know their identity. So what's your thoughts on just, as long as you've got solid brand values and you know your audience and who you want to reach and where you want to expand it with acquisition, that's surely where content should be placed.
I mean, from a measurement point of view, we've got quite a strong view at Facebook. You know, the last 5 years we've been really focusing on it. So we would say, you know, where there is no defined customer journey, consumer journey, go get one. And I say that with a little bit of controversy, and maybe to use the Hollywood example. So, you know, that has been a real finger in the air industry. You know, that's what I was referring to, sort of the dark arts of entertainment marketing, how you sort of get people excited about entertainment content and go watch the thing, go to the movie theatre and buy a ticket. And we've dragged that industry kicking and screaming to understand their consumer journey. Because for us, if they're not understanding it and then optimizing towards it, you know, without being too brutal, they're going to die out as an industry, you know, because we're just working with so many categories and brands and advertisers that have got it right and are flying. So we would say that quite emphatically. And I think for Ann Summers, you know, we can do it for Hollywood. You could absolutely do it for Ann Summers.
I completely agree. I think, you know, we are total measurement junkies. All I'm going to say is it doesn't always have to be revenue, but I think that customer journey is absolutely critical. And there is a way to measure stuff. And if you're not measuring it, how do you know? Is it working? Why am I spending here? You know, are my brand values sort of going higher? And I think, you know, you look at the film industry, and I completely agree with you. And it's quite interesting that a lot of film isn't out. You know, film actors and script writers are now coming into TV. It's quite an interesting point. But also, look at the films that really make it. They're the franchises. And they are run within an inch of their life in terms of what those customer journeys are. And they're run in a very systematic and organised way. And they're the ones that are pulling in at the box office. So it depends whether you want to do lots of sort of small stuff or if you want to become big brand. And I know it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think you have to go down that route for long-term success. I agree.
You can measure, I mean, you can use softer measurement tactics just to kind of get you a directional guidance, and it is not easy. And honestly, there's massive major brands who still haven't got their heads around it properly. It's a real challenge. But there's always something to give you even a direction. You know, the cliche they always say is like, you're in the middle of the ocean, you need a good idea to at least know which way you're going. You know.
So you can use campaigns, advertising, content to help you get that direction. You know, when we do stuff, always at the heart of it is, you know, there might be this great idea or this great idea, but actually this one, we wouldn't know if it worked or not. So actually, if we did this and we ran it like this, it would tell us something about ourselves that we can learn going forward, as opposed to just for that thing. And I agree, it is hard, but I think you have to find that way, even if they are soft measures. It doesn't always have to be revenue.
Very much. Thank you very much. You turned into Elvis.
That was a very deep voice.
Thank you very much.